Kia ora, and welcome to this BusinessLink Pacific instructional video. My name's Matt, and in this video, we're going to cover how to use the online adaptation grant form by BusinessLink Pacific. This is the second video. In the first video, we showed how to create your account on the BusinessLink Pacific grant portal. So if you haven't already created an account, I'd encourage you to check out the first video. If you're watching this on YouTube, then we'll include the link to that first video in the description below. But assuming you already have your account, we're going to click Existing User Login, and we're going to log in with our account. And we can log in with whatever method we use to create our account in the first place. So I'm going to log in with Google and choose the account. And once we log in, we should see this screen. The first step for the application is to complete the eligibility checklist. You can click Eligibility Checklist, and as we go through the checklist, we've got to check that our business meets all of the eligibility to ensure that we're able to apply. And we want to do this before we start the application form so that we don't complete the form and then find out that our business might not be eligible for the adaptation grant. So we can acknowledge that our business is an existing business and it's currently operating in one of these Pacific Island countries. Our business must be employing less than 50 people. It must be owned by at least 50% national citizens. It should have all the necessary licenses and or registrations that are required to operate in our industry or in our market. In some cases, possibly you won't need any licenses or registrations, so you can just tick that box. But if you do need any, then obviously you should have those for your business. We also need to acknowledge that we're in compliance with all our tax requirements and that we're meeting all our loan obligations, or we're adhering to an agreed payment plan for those loan obligations. Our business should not be subject to bankruptcy proceedings, and it should not primarily trade in alcohol, drugs, tobacco, gambling, firearms, or other harmful substances. And now this exclusion list is based on the IFC policy. And so if you want to see the full details of that exclusion list, you can click here to view that IFC policy. We should also acknowledge that our business has up-to-date records and documentation that's required to provide evidence of our business eligibility. The project that we are applying for with the adaptation grant also needs to be eligible. So when applying for the adaptation grant, you're going to detail out your adaptation plan and the project that you're planning on spending the grant money on. And so certain activities are going to be eligible for funding and certain activities will not be eligible for grant funding. So the types of activities that are eligible include contracting professional advisory services, contracting technical or other services, purchasing materials or equipment, using the money for working capital, such as buying stock, offering equity for a loan. There are some ineligible activities as well, and so the grant money cannot be used to fund payroll, pay rent, or meet other normal day-to-day operating overheads. It can't be used to purchase goods and services not directly related to your adaptation plan, or used for paying debts or property acquisition. So we can acknowledge that our adaptation project meets those eligibility criteria. And from that, we are now eligible to apply. It's important to know that grants are awarded competitively based on size and country. Grants of up to $5,000 will be available to businesses with up to 5 employees, and larger amounts are available for larger businesses. Once we click Continue, we can find out about the assessment criteria that will be applied to our application. So it's important to know that the adaptation grants are limited and they are competitively assessed. So that means that not everyone is going to be awarded an adaptation grant. This page gives some information about the assessment criteria that Business Link Pacific will apply when assessing your application. So it could be quite important to read these assessment criteria and consider them when you're answering the question in your application form. But we can acknowledge those assessment criteria and continue. It's also important to know that if we receive the grant, we have some obligations as a grant recipient, and this includes providing evidence that the grant was used for its stated purpose. We may need to provide information to Business Link Pacific about our business in a regular survey that will be used to determine the impact of that grant. And we could be asked to comply with additional requests for information by Business Link Pacific to determine how the funding was or will be used and to understand the impact of the grant on the business. So we can acknowledge these, and now we're ready to apply. There are some tips here on how to ensure that your application has the best chance of success. So importantly, you want to make sure that you answer all the questions in the application form. You should ensure that you have a good and well thought out adaptation plan before applying. And when answering the questions, you want to ensure that you're providing enough detail so that when Business Link Pacific is considering your answer against the assessment criteria, they're able to see the benefit that your project is providing. We can now click Apply Now, and this will open up the application form. We have some instructions here on how to use the form, but it's important to remember that this is an online form, and that means it does require an internet connection to access it. As you answer the questions, answers will be automatically saved as you go, and they're going to show saved beside them to give you an indication that the information you provide in that box is saved and up to date. If you do lose internet connection while you're completing the form, that's not a problem, but we do. It's really important that you don't close the tab like this, close your browser, or reload the page. Because if you do that while your questions aren't answered, then your information may be lost. If you do have an issue while you're completing the form, then we would encourage you to copy any unsaved answers into a Word document or a similar application that you might have on your computer. So you can copy those unsaved answers and then paste them back into the online form when you have an internet connection. If your internet connection drops out or maybe is a bit patchy while you're using it, don't worry. You can continue completing the form and wait until those answers save when the internet connection comes back online. Cool. There's also an option here where you can download the adaptation grant guidelines at any time. And so these give some important information about the eligibility, about the assessment criteria, about the amounts that are available. And so you can have a look through guideline stock, and it should answer any questions that you might have. You can also choose to download this document by clicking this button here and then clicking download. But going back to the form, I'm going to show you through some of the different question types that are in the form, and how you can use the form to answer all the questions. One thing you may notice already is that some of these questions have already been filled out. These questions have been filled out based on the information that I gave when I first created my account on the grant portal. You can also see that beside them it says saved. So that's showing that that question has been saved. I could change one of the answers I've provided here, and you'll see that saved has now disappeared, but now it's reappeared again to show that the change I've made to that question has now been saved. So you can see that we've got questions like this that are just asking us for a single line, so we're expecting just a small amount of information. There's questions like these radials here, with a single select, so we can only choose one option at a time. And then we've got paragraph questions like this disclosure question. So in this question, we're asking you to disclose any business, personal, existing or prior relationship that you may have with DT Global, with your national government, with the New Zealand government, or with any of their subsidiaries, employees, which haven't been disclosed. So all you need to do is just write any disclosures you might have relating to that, and then click I confirm. So having these disclosures does not disqualify you necessarily from accessing the grant, but it is really important that you make the disclosures because if you don't, then you will possibly be excluded. If you don't have any disclosures, you can leave that box blank, but we'd still ask that you tick the I confirm button to confirm that you don't have any disclosures to make. You can, we've got some more radial questions here. There's a drop-down question like this one. Some questions possibly you don't have an answer for. So for example, if you don't have a business website or you don't have a business Facebook page, you can choose to leave them blank, or you may choose just to leave, for example, an NA to say not applicable in that box. You may have also noticed that under some of the questions we have this description text in grey, and so that should just give you a bit of a guide as to what information BusinessLink Pacific is expecting you to put into that box. Some of them, particularly the paragraph question, there may be an approximate word count as indicated. We'd encourage you to consider this a maximum number and try to stick within that word limit when answering those questions. Another question type you might see is this grid question type. So I can answer information about the gender breakdown of the business owners. As I fill these numbers in, you'll see that the total number is automatically calculated for me. As I go down, I can see a larger grid question type, and this one's about the number of employees I've had first in December 2019 and later in December 2020. So I can type in the number of full-time female employees, the number of full-time male employees, and the number of full-time employees of another gender, if any, and this will then create a total number, calculate that for me. Now, out of those 5 employees, the next box is asking how many of those would fall within the youth category. So out of those 5, how many of those would be between 18 to 30 years old? And so I can enter that number in there as well. And then I'd do the same for my part-time and any temporary employees that I have. And then the same again for my December 2020 numbers. There's also multi-select questions like this one, where you can choose more than one answer, or if none of them apply, you can leave them blank. As you complete the form, you may notice that sometimes questions get crossed out. That will mean that those questions aren't relevant and you don't need to answer the question. So in this example, if I've said that I don't have business insurance, I don't need to answer what my business is currently covered for, and I don't need to answer if there's any other areas that my business is covered for that weren't covered in this drop-down list. If I change my answer back to yes, you'll see that that question appears again and I can answer it. You may also notice at the end of every section this Need Help button. When completing the adaptation grant form, there are 2 ways that you can get help. The first is your local Chamber of Commerce. So BusinessLink Pacific is working with the local chambers in many of those countries, and they'll be able to help you to answer the questions in this form, and they can also help with translations if that's needed. The other way that you can get help is using these Need Help boxes at the end of every section. So you can use this box to perhaps try to clarify a question or to ask a question that you might have that hasn't already been answered in the guidelines doc or in this video. So you can type your question in here, like this, and then I can send that. It's important to know that this isn't a 24/7 chat service, but BusinessLink Pacific will do their best to get back to you as soon as possible. So what that means is that you shouldn't expect an answer right away, but when you do get a response, you'll be emailed to the email address that you signed up with when you created your account. You'll receive an email from BusinessLink Pacific to let you know that your query has been answered. And the answer to your question will appear in this chat box. You'll also see a notification on the bottom right, which will show you that you've had a response to your question there, and you'll be able to click on this on the button to take you to the right place where that's been answered. There are 5 different sections in the form. First one is you and your business, which asks questions about you and your business. There is also the financial position of your business. There's questions on your business adaptation plan, questions on the grant that you're seeking, and finally questions about the proposed impacts of your adaptation plan. As you navigate through the form, you notice that all of the sections start open, but you may click on a section name or on the drop-down arrow to open and close it as you go through. That will help you to navigate it. If a section is hidden, you can click it again to open it up. Now there's one final question type that I thought we should go through on this video, and that's in this section here about the grant that you're seeking. So these are what we call table question types. And in this section, we're asking for you to provide some detail and some breakdowns of how the grant money would be used. So, for example, for this question, we're asking you to break down how much the money will be used to purchase plant, materials, equipment, and assets. And in the next question, we're asking how much money will be used to pay for services, how much money will be used to pay for working capital, how much money will be used to pay as equity for a loan, and how much will be used for any other purpose. Now, of course, you may not be using the grant money for some of these reasons. So, for example, maybe you're not going to be using the grant money for working capital. So you could simply type NA and 0, or you could leave that table blank. If, for example, you're planning on using some of the money to purchase a car, you may type car and then the estimated cost of that car in the cost section, and then maybe you'll add another row, and maybe you're also going to be using the money to purchase a printer, and you can put the value of the printer and the cost in there. And so we would encourage you to provide as much detail as possible and provide as detailed a breakdown as possible when answering these questions, and you can continue to add as many rows as you like to detail as many different items that you have in each of these categories. You can also remove rows as you wish. Once you have answered all the questions in the application form, you're ready to submit your application. Now it's important that you check that you have answered all the questions before you submit, and we would also encourage you to review the assessment criteria to ensure that you are addressing those criteria and giving your application the best chance of success before you submit. So once we click Submit Application, this pop-up is asking us to confirm that we're ready. And it just encourages us to check our application like what we discussed. Once you do submit your application, you won't be able to edit it again. So make sure you do check it before you submit it. But once you click Submit, we'll get this little pop-up notification to confirm that's been sent. And we'll also receive an email from BusinessLink Pacific confirming that the application has been received and giving some more information about when you can expect a response from BusinessLink Pacific about your application. We can then return back and we can see that our grant application has been submitted, but we can't edit it anymore. So we're ready to sign out. And that's the end of the process. So I hope this video has been informative for you. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions, you can obviously check out the grant guidelines, also available from the landing page here. And of course, you can reach out to BusinessLink Pacific and ask them any questions.